Everybody, thank you so much for being with us today. This is the Homework Starts with Home information session on the Hamilton Family and San Francisco Unified School District pilot and the initiative that has created. Welcome and thanks for being with us today. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping points. If you are joining over the webinar, we just ask that you try to keep your line muted as much as possible when you're not speaking. That'll just prevent some background noise from getting picked up on the recording. This session is being recorded and may be posted publicly. The specific pieces that will be recorded are the slide presentation and the audio, so just please be aware of that. We do intend to leave time for questions, and we'll also give you an opportunity to ask questions throughout the session. To do that, we're using a tool called menti.com, M-E-N-T-I.com. And right now, if you have a browser window that's open, that you can open on your computer or a mobile device that you can browse to menti.com and enter the code 389619. That will give you a chance to participate and provide feedback and input. We have just a starter question for us right now, which when you log into Menti, using that information is available to you right now. And that's just to get a sense of who's joining us today. So if folks are game to go ahead and just quickly provide some responses to those questions, that'll give us a good handle on who's on today's webinar. All right, so we have some people with lived experience of housing instability, somebody who's worked for a public housing agency. We'll give folks another couple of minutes to respond. Or another minute, maybe. All right, I'm gonna continue on. Another representative from a housing agency. Thank you for participating. Those of you that did. For those of you that haven't yet participated, if you also open up menti.com and put in that code, that will also give you an opportunity to ask questions for our presenters throughout the session, and then we'll get to those questions that you pose at the end of the session so folks can actually see up on the screen the question that you've asked. So just, again, encourage you to use that, particularly if you have questions that are popping up kind of throughout the discussion today. So as a reminder, this is the 6th of 6 information sessions for Homework Starts with Home, which have really been intended to help unpack and explain and maybe explore the elements of the preliminary practice model that's articulated in the request for proposals. That practice model has a series of ingredients. It's described intentionally as a preliminary practice model, recognizing it's going to be refined and changed in working together with between the funding partners and the selected grantees over the life of the program. But it includes a focus on equity, making sure that we are attentive to the significant racial and ethnic and other disparities that exist in who experiences homelessness, that we have a strong emphasis on making sure that people with lived experience are themselves directly involved in helping to shape and guide the programs that are being developed and implemented. So call this element the nothing about us without us component of the model. That we want to make sure we're doing as much as we can to identify homelessness early and make sure that our responses to homelessness and housing instability are trauma informed. That we want to approach ending homelessness for students and families from a 2-gen perspective, or really looking at the entire family, not just looking at parents in isolation or kids in isolation, but looking at them together. that we want to use a progressive engagement approach to serve as many families as we can, while also being successful with every family that we serve. And so using progressive engagement as a modality for how we balance those two competing forces. That we have a strong housing first orientation, recognizing and rooted in the understanding that housing is what ends homelessness. So we want to remove barriers to anybody getting into housing and make that happen as quickly as possible. That we want to have mainstream resources like those controlled through local governments or other institutions play a significant role for people experiencing housing instability. And that we want to be attentive to where we can continue to improve and make continuous improvement a priority in all that we do. So these elements are intended to be something that unifies all of the specific implementations of Homework Starts with Home over the next 3 years, but also elements that really can flex and adapt based on local conditions and context and opportunities. And so intended to be something that is common and yet locally tailored. When applications are submitted, we'll be looking at those to determine the extent to which each applicant is currently implementing these different elements, conveys an ability to increase or improve their implementation, and demonstrates a philosophical alignment with these different components of the model. Today's session is kind of exciting because whereas our previous information sessions have really focused on specific elements of this practice model, today is really looking at another community's approach that was a key part of inspiring Homework Starts with Home, and one which touches many of the elements of the Homework Starts with Home practice model. And so a chance to really see maybe synergistically how another community, in this case San Francisco, has been able to implement an approach that has a lot in common with what we hope Homework Starts with Home will achieve. And so I am delighted that for today's presenters, I am joined by Jeff Kositsky, Tomiquia Moss, and Mary Richards. And what I'd like to do now is give each of them a chance to just talk a little bit about themselves, their roles, and in particular, their connection to this partnership between Hamilton Families and San Francisco Unified School District. And so let's start that off with Jeff. And Jeff, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, greetings, everyone, and thanks for joining this. My name is Jeff Kositsky. I'm the director of San Francisco's Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing. San Francisco is a city and a county, so all of our social services are lined up under one government entity, and our department serves as the center of gravity for the issue of homelessness, and the majority of programs and funding and staffing at the city level and the county level on homelessness are run through our departments. Prior to this, I was the executive director at Hamilton Families and helped develop the Heading Home initiative, which we'll be talking about later on in this presentation.
So Tomiquia. Oh, we might be having an audio glitch with Tomiquia. Tomiquia, if you're there, we couldn't hear you. There you are.
Hi, everyone. Yes, sorry. I was following the rules and had everyone on mute. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Tomiquia Moss, and I am the CEO of Hamilton Families. We are an organization that supports families to find permanent housing solutions for themselves and their children. We do everything from crisis shelter services to transitional housing programming, as well as run a robust rental subsidy program, providing case management support to ensure that families are able to find housing and stay housed. Prior to becoming CEO of Hamilton Families, I was the former chief of staff to the mayor of Oakland, Libby Schaaf, for the last 2.5 years of her first term.
Fantastic, thank you. And Mary.
All right. It's Mary Richards. My title here, and it describes some of the work that I do here as a public school educator, if you will, or administrator. I currently oversee the Office of Counseling and Post-Secondary Success, but another facet of my work, which is a good portion of my work, is under the division where this office sits, which is the Student, Family, and Community Support Division. And within that work is, we started out when I took this role 3 years ago, I was given the responsibility of overseeing our team or an individual that supported services, programming, some basic infrastructure, and the needs of our homeless students and families. And the office was formerly called Families and Youth in Transition, and just this year with the establishment of a new policy in our district, and that is kind of aligned with a lot of the visioning and the enhancement of supports and services and some of the focus vision of our city leadership. We are now entitled Students and Families Experiencing Homelessness. That is now sort of the overarching title of that office, but it also now embraces and supports the provisions of this new policy that was developed. So essentially before that time, we provided basic services as in tutoring, supports for uniforms, things of that, transportation, doing some level of reconciliation of school placement and school choice, but also providing referrals and resources for agencies outside of the school districts which were most focused on housing, and ultimately that relationship developed, and that's the sort of the Jeff history piece, and that's Jeff Kositsky, when that partnership began a number of years ago with Hamilton, and to where now today obviously has made so much progress within that relationship.
Thank you so much, Mary. And for those of you that are joining us, I just want to just say how lucky I think we are to be able to have these three with us, joining us for today's conversation from San Francisco, and really able to speak to how this initiative, this program got started, and really how it's evolved. And before we really get into the way we'll delve into that is through a moderated discussion today. Before we get into that moderated discussion, what I want to do first is just share a little bit about why, in the context of Homework Starts with Home, we really wanted to lift up this program and this initiative in the Bay Area. And that is that it is not a stretch at all to say that a presentation that Jeff and Mary's colleague from the school district, Kevin Truitt, gave at the 2016 National Alliance to End Homelessness Conference was really a direct inspiration of Homework Starts with Home. And in particular, the ideas of building on the homeless and highly mobile pilot that preceded Homework Starts with Home in the ways that are described in the preliminary practice model. That inspiration, that spark really came from hearing Jeff and Kevin present the preliminary findings from a Google-funded pilot between Hamilton families and the school district around serving families primarily through a rapid rehousing lens. And so some of the things, just to share with you, some of the things that really stood out for us within state government were the exciting ways that program had identified clear ways for school personnel to be engaged in a way that felt practical at the school level, but was more than simply connecting students with their kind of McKinney-Vento federal entitlements. It was really around not just addressing their school stability, which is obviously critical, but also looking toward the roles that schools can play in that early identification and linkage to resources that can solve the housing issue directly. And so I'll say that for myself, really an incredible opportunity to think about school personnel having the hotline, the resource that they could tap to be able to help support a family in a way that the individual teacher or social worker or McKinney-Vento liaison may not be able to do themselves directly, but really have a linkage to personnel and to support that would be responsive to that family and student's needs. We really also liked the way that by using a rapid rehousing approach, it was intending to help families transition as quickly as possible back to stability. And we're really excited to see in the February 2016 report that's shown on your screen here and that is still available online, some really promising results from that work. What has been even more exciting is that since that time, so in just a couple of years' time, the initial success with that pilot has inspired a much larger effort within San Francisco. And to help us understand a little bit of that, I am delighted now to, first I want to make an important distinction in what I was about to say. So the initiative that has been inspired on the basis of this pilot is in San Francisco called Heading Home. So people in Minnesota may be familiar with Heading Home back in 2014, our Heading Home plan, or just earlier this year, the Heading Home Together plan that was released, which is really the action plan for how we prevent and end homelessness over the next 3 years in Minnesota. That's a different heading home, of course, than the campaign in San Francisco to end family homelessness. And so although these two things are obviously connected in spirit in lots of ways, they are different things. So today when you hear our Bay Area presenters talk about Heading Home, they are really referring to the campaign in San Francisco, not the plan to prevent and end homelessness here in Minnesota. So those are not the same things. So to talk a little bit about then what the initial pilot has inspired and what the San Francisco campaign is, I'm happy to just now introduce a video featuring one of our panelists today. Here is Tomiquia on video.
Here in San Francisco, there are over 1,800 homeless children in our public schools. This crisis began after the recession in 2008, when the number of homeless families in San Francisco doubled. The system became
Sorry, I don't know what happened there. Let me try that again.
Here in San Francisco, there are over 1,800 homeless children in our public schools. This crisis began after the recession in 2008, when the number of homeless families in San Francisco doubled. The system became increasingly overloaded. Most families being without a home for nearly 2 years bounce between couch surfing and shelters while they struggle to find permanent housing. We know that the trauma caused by long-term homelessness robs children of their full potential. Not only that, they are 7 times more likely to become homeless as adults. We believe that no child or family should be without a home, and we believe we can make this a reality. The city of San Francisco took a stance and made this issue its top priority. We partnered with San Francisco's public schools and set up a hotline for school staff to notify us if a child was homeless in order to get them enrolled in our program. We began reaching families more quickly. We built relationships with landlords all over the Bay Area to ensure that we had safe and secure housing for families. We are now partnering with over 100 landlords across the Bay. We created a housing stability team that meets with families to increase their income and ensure long-term economic security. We visit families in their homes, learning about their challenges and helping them to set goals. Families are becoming rooted in their communities and have a foundation for a healthy life. This past year, we officially launched Heading Home, a $30 million initiative to help 800 homeless families move into permanent housing. We asked you to join us, and you did in incredible ways. You sang, you danced, you painted, you made s'mores, you hit home runs. Over this past year, you've helped more than 200 families move into permanent housing. Parents are able to cook for their children and help them with their homework after school. Families are able to play and relax in their own homes. With their housing crisis resolved, families are on the road to living a full and meaningful life. Heading Homes will help hundreds of families move beyond homelessness. Tonight, we can help one family move into their own home. Join Hamilton Families and help break the cycle of poverty and family homelessness in our community.
Excellent. Well, with that as an introduction to the pilot that Hamilton Families and the San Francisco Unified School District began, and then this larger Heading Home initiative that it inspired, I think maybe a good starting point for our discussion today is really to go back into that history and think about how this partnership came to be. And so, Jeff, would you be able to kind of start us off and just describe a little bit about how this thing ever got started in the first place and what it took to get it going and keep it going? Oh, Jeff, did we lose you? Well then, Jeff, if you're there, we're not able to hear your audio right now. Tamika, maybe I'll pitch that to you then. Would you be game to just talk a little bit about where did this partnership really start and what did it take to get it going?
Sure. So after the recession, we started to really see a spike in family homelessness. And there's always been folks who were struggling, but in the Bay Area, there was a significant jump after the recession. Folks had lost their jobs. It was hard. The jobs that were being added back to the economy were not sufficient to support families in maintaining permanent housing. And so at that time, Hamilton and the school district started working together around this pilot to really look at how many, and really the impetus for this was the data that the school district began to share that revealed that at that time, 1 in 25 students in the school district were experiencing homelessness. And what we found was, so the number was sort of mind-blowing, but also how long families were experiencing homelessness was up to 16 months at that point. And so the pilot was really based on that data that the hypothesis was, could we reduce the amount of time that families were experiencing homelessness and begin to chip away at this increasing number of folks who were experiencing homelessness. And so during the pilot phase, which was a year, we were able to reduce the amount of time that families experienced homelessness from 16 months to 8 months. And so that's when we began to see that the rapid rehousing strategy, and not only that, but the coordination between the school district staff, the principals, the social workers, and Hamilton family staff, working directly together and creating some communication infrastructure, some direct referral processes, ways that families were able to, once they were identified to have a housing crisis, they were directly connected to Hamilton families and being able to be assessed and get into our programming. So it was a combination of those things that really demonstrated that we were able to move the needle on getting people into permanent housing quicker. And so at that point, there was conversation with the city and county of San Francisco, really under Mayor Lee's, former Mayor Lee's leadership around really the premise that family homelessness is solvable and that if we create the right type of partnership and be vigilant about our investments and resources, that we can really disrupt this problem permanently. And I think the working definition of ending family homelessness in San Francisco was that we know that folks will experience a housing crisis. But if we can rehouse them within 90 days and then have our system really be able to triage those folks into housing quicker, then that's really what we mean by sort of operationally ending family homelessness. And I guess the other factor here was this sort of, at the same time, the city was beginning to launch coordinated entry. And I don't know if Jeff, if you've re-entered the conversation or not, but please jump in, which the city was working to launch family coordinated entry, which was a consolidated system where all family services or homelessness services was going to be centralized in one department, which Jeff now runs. All of the resources across city departments. We are a city and county here in San Francisco. We're going to be consolidated. And then we'd have one front door where all folks experiencing homelessness would come through and be referred to assessed appropriately and referred to whatever resources were available based on their need. And so those things were converging at this time. So as we were partnering with the school district to really start to address the students who were experiencing homelessness, simultaneously coordinated entry was being rolled out for families. And so it gave way to, okay, we have enough of the ingredients that we think will work. Why don't we try to do this campaign where if we're able to address 800 families' housing crisis, rehouse them, then that unclogs the backlog of families who have been experiencing homelessness for, again, 16 months or more, and then it allowed for coordinated entry to sort of reset and have enough capacity to place people where they need to be. And so that was what sort of drove the Heading Home initiative and allowed us to really scale up the learnings that we had seen work really well in the pilot and sort of really try to understand and deepen our work with the school district to have more impact over time. Great.
And so just to give folks a sense of how much scaling up we're talking about, Tomiquia, am I right in understanding that the original pilot was $1 million pilot and the Heading Home campaign is a $30 million effort?
That's correct.
Okay. So not a small increase, a pretty substantial leap in terms of scale and impact.
Right, and I think the other piece to mention about the initiative was that we recognized that no one entity could do this alone. It really required the school district, the city, and private philanthropy and the nonprofits really coming together to try to bring our resources together as well as our expertise to try to get at the problem. And so I think that that's a really important piece as you all work on your design and folks work on their applications, is that partnership is critically important in order to both, sort of understand your impact, but also track your progress.
Thank you for that. And so I'm curious.
Eric, I'm sorry. This is Jeff. Oh, okay. I do not know what happened. I just gave what I thought to be a brilliant 5-minute presentation, and then I realized that nobody had heard it. The call must have dropped on my end.
I'm so sorry, Jeff.
Oh, no,
sorry, we missed that as well.
Probably my fault.
So Tomiquia just did a great job of summarizing kind of some of the history and how this really created then the larger Heading Home initiative. I think one of the things that I know you were involved directly in the journey of kind of where did the first conversation happen that created that initial pilot? Could you just give us a little bit of that history and flavor?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I'll do is just summarize my brilliant presentation that I gave that nobody heard but me. And that there were really three reasons why we did this, or four. One is that homelessness had increased dramatically in San Francisco from 2007 to 2013, and we wanted to see that reduced. The other is that we had found that families, it was taking families 3 to 6 months before they even sought assistance or got appropriate assistance, and that the school district was in a better position than many other institutions, given the trust that most families have with their schools, to be able to identify when a family is in crisis and to get them assistance quickly. The third was that we saw there was a gap of we needed about 800 more rapid rehousing slots in a surge. So what we had seen was, so a lot of it started with data, looking at data, and we saw that between 2007 and 2013, 2014 or so, the demand for services was just increasing, and the city had not responded. But then we saw the demand flatten out. So our hypothesis was that there were a lot of underserved families, and if we could help 800 additional families with rapid rehousing, in addition to some other efforts the city was starting to engage in, that this would reduce the length of homelessness from an average of about 16 months for a family back down to what it had been in the early 2000s, which was about 90 days. And that we also knew that the city wasn't going to fund this by themselves. It just wasn't a likely scenario. So we got then Mayor Ed Lee to put in about $7 million of city funding, and then Hamilton raised the additional $23 million that we had budgeted for to achieve this. So it really started with sort of a data analysis, and then trying to understand why families weren't, why it was taking them so long to get help, and then talking to the school about whether or not they would be willing, as probably the people who, I think the parent liaisons and the school social workers are probably the first people to know that a family is in crisis. And so that's how we did the pilot. Tomiquia May had said the pilot was very successful and saw a reduction in the length of homelessness of about 8 months for families. And then once we had that information, we just took that to the mayor and to the private sector and raised the money that we've needed. And then I'll just add so far from 2013 to 2017, we've seen about a 20% reduction in family homelessness in San Francisco. And Heading Home is really, in many ways, just getting off the ground or getting scaled up. So we expect to see a pretty dramatic reduction over the next couple of years as Hamilton and the school district and the city achieve our mutual goal of helping 800 more families with rapid rehousing. And hopefully I didn't repeat everything Tomiquia just said.
I think you are both clearly on the same page in terms of where those things are, but I think that was helpful in terms of adding additional context, Jeff, so thank you for that. I think one of the questions that I can imagine a lot of people wondering is, well, where do you get started with this if you don't even maybe have a relationship between a nonprofit rapid rehousing provider or a county government and a school district that could really be operationalized like this? Where does that get going? So can you talk a little bit, Jeff, about where that began, or Tomiquia or Mary, any thoughts about what those first pebbles that started the avalanche might have been?
So, after we did our analysis at Hamilton, we essentially, it was just a phone call to Kevin Truitt, who runs student services for the San Francisco Unified School District, and we sat down and talked about it. And this makes so much common sense that immediately the school district got excited about it. But I would also say that, and I don't know what things are like in Minnesota, but in California, school districts are pretty squeezed for resources. So I think an important thing was we weren't asking for the schools to invest more resources or even necessarily more time. We showed up saying, hey, we can make this easier for you and your families. We've got the resources. We talked to then a bunch of school social workers, and we came up with this idea of just creating a special email and phone number that school social workers could call, and we went out and trained all the social workers on how this was going to work. But it really, honestly, it just started with a phone call, and I would say a recognition that the city and the county is in a much better position than, and in fact, it's not the school district's responsibility to try to create housing opportunities for families. This was just a marriage of two different organizations leveraging our strengths and our relationships and our resources to help as many students as we possibly could.
Thank you. Tomiquia or Mary, anything to add to that?
Sure. And I was listening and actually agreeing. If you see my face, I was nodding, sort of having been on this journey for 3 years with both, starting with Jeff and then Tomiquia. The one thing that I would emphasize from my end, and Jeff is 100% correct, and Kevin and I have had ongoing conversations about this. It's about having the right people, but it's also about people doing the right work. And that was sort of the shift that we did as a school district, because one of the great fortunes that we have is that many of our student services personnel are supported by local bonds that have been developed or co-developed with city partnership. And I think where we're great and blessed in San Francisco is we've always had the mayor's office and all the departments within the city almost in step with SFUSD or completely in step with SFUSD. We've always been these really robust partners in specific work, and especially around social justice and equity. And so it was common sense. That was the first word that came out of my, or what I was thinking in response to this, Eric, and which Jeff also shared. Of course, because we have, as a school district, that frontline, immediate access to students and families, and very diverse, and many of our students and families are struggling with poverty. So just poverty is something, and lower socioeconomic, and especially when you're thinking about thriving and surviving in a place like San Francisco, based on our economy and housing market. And so having access and a trusting relationship with those families, because we provide as many services for families that fit other levels of potentially having challenges or needs, but most specifically in this way. And so our next step beyond having that access point and that trust with those families was, how do we, for those families that basically are on potentially the precipice, or we're trying to prevent this type of circumstance, which is part of our work as well, is how do we ensure that our social workers, because it is social workers, it is our parent liaisons, mostly our social workers, but our school counselors as well, and especially at the upper grades, because of our unaccompanied homeless youth that are attending our schools as well. I mean, there's just so many dynamics of this. And so how do we ensure that they are equipped, not just under, through the provisions of McKinney-Vento, but that are doing strategic, innovative things based on the supports that are needed for students and families, but also what we know is going to put them on that trajectory or that course of beyond what SFUSD presents to them, that post-secondary equation for our kids. So it is access, but it's also making sure that we not only have the right people, which is fundamentally when we, shake out the numbers as far as personnel that we have. Social workers, we have roughly 100, and they're mostly deployed at our elementary schools. And counselors, we have roughly 140 staff. And I'll bet this is not their complete role, but when they're equipped with actually the proper training, the proper knowledge, the proper skills, the proper sort of protocols to follow with the referrals and these interagency partnerships outside of the school district and throughout the city, then we're doing our best level of service for families. But we're also able to enhance. We're going to do better work because of the development of this policy that we created to enhance those basic supports and services. So I think I see the practical parts of this and the logistical parts of this and this partnership, but the motivation to me was, first, of course it makes sense, and secondarily, as what we cast ourselves as based on our core values, these social justice warriors and our management of resources in an equitable way, how could we not? How could we not? So that's kind of where we stand. And again, to go back to what I found as the most stirring sort of mantra was when Mayor Ed Lee said during the initiation or the launch of the Heading Home, we can do better and we must do better. And so that's what we stand on.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mary. A question that I want to just ask all three of you then, looking back, certainly the impact is incredible, this 30-fold increase in the scale of what you're doing together in partnership, but also, I mean, Jeff, the 20% reduction you've already seen in family homelessness, really remarkable. I am sure that it has not always been simple or easy at every step along the journey. And so really with an eye toward thinking about new partnerships that have emerged and that are going to be applying for this funding, what challenges or obstacles might you have encountered in getting started that would be helpful for people to anticipate, and how did you kind of overcome those?
Well, I think ironically the challenge, the main challenge always in San Francisco is finding, or in the Bay Area, is finding apartments or homes for folks. So one of the ways we addressed that challenge was to kind of redo how we handled rapid rehousing at Hamilton by hiring a real estate team and putting together some software that interacts with our client data systems to kind of just efficiently manage the search for housing. I think the other challenge, which is really ongoing, it's actually a new challenge, is that one of the reasons we created Heading Home was because the city didn't have a coordinated system for managing how we got resources to homeless people in San Francisco. And we are in the process of standing that up. So in some ways, we're trying to fix a problem that Heading Home already was trying to address. And it's sort of ironic because I was the person who was trying to kind of subvert the city or their lack of a good process, and now I'm in charge of trying to fix that process. And frankly, it's been challenging to do that, and has in some ways slowed down our work. But I think at the end of the day, we all recognize that, and I don't know where you all are at with coordinated entry in Minnesota, but I think at the end of the day, we recognize coordinated entry is a really important tool, and now we're trying to figure out what's the school district's role in that, and I don't think we've landed on the right solution. So we're sort of in process. So trying to figure out how to work with your, when the city doesn't have a system, it's sort of easy to kind of just plug in and do better. But when the city's trying to create a system, so I would say moving forward is to understand how your system operates and how the schools are going to fit into your coordinated entry. But it's a work in progress for us. I don't think we have found the right solution yet, but we're working on it.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, and I would just add a couple of pieces to that. I think one of the challenges we have just across the ecosystem is capacity. Being able, not only sort of the housing stock being available for people, but just the capacity to do the kind of coordination and alignment and collaboration that is needed to stay connected as you refer families, even as we stand up coordinated entry, being able to keep all of these systems and people coordinated across, several systems is just an ongoing challenge. So I think that that's a piece that figuring out what kinds of mechanisms you can put in place to have alignment be sort of at the center force, and leveraging your capacity is really key. I think one of the other challenges that we are tackling with the school district is data sharing. You know, there are making sure that you have data agreements that allow you to really track the students through the process and allow for sort of real-time analysis of who still is experiencing homelessness. One of the things that we've seen is that if you don't have someone that's able to sort of update your data and a family has been served or is housed, when do you know that again? Like, do you have to go a full school year before that information gets updated? So I think just being able, and we're working with the Urban Institute and the school district in Hamilton to really make sure that we have an evaluation process actually of this pilot, so that we can know how impactful the rapid rehousing approach and partnership with the district has been. So I think that that's a really important piece to do on the front end, but also then making sure that you have ongoing data sharing agreements that allow folks to use the data effectively to improve your interventions over time is really important. And then just lastly, one of the unique challenges we have in the Bay Area, and I don't know that this is the case for Minnesota, is the geographical constraints that we have around affordability. So a lot of the heading home families that we're serving in partnership with the school district, they originate, their children originate in the San Francisco Unified School District, but we find them housing outside of the city and county of San Francisco. So really being able to have a continuity of support when a family has to relocate outside of the city and county, and how do we leverage school partnerships across geographies and jurisdictions, as well as ongoing, case management, social services support to ensure that those children and the families thrive in their new community. So that's also a challenge that we didn't anticipate when we rolled this partnership out.
That's really helpful, Tomiquia. Thank you. Mary, anything that you'd add to what Jeff and Tomiquia have shared around challenges and overcome them?
Absolutely. I definitely would emphasize, and this is something that when I attend the National Association of Education for Homeless Children and Youth on an annual basis, but I also am in contact with different school districts throughout the United States. And one deep conversation was with San Diego Office of Education and their work with the city on, and it's exactly what Tomiquia was talking about, and Jeff mentioned too, this coordinated entry system and their role as a school district in supporting that for the city agency. The challenge was, and they said, if you don't have essentially a full data team on both sides of this to manage that and make sure that you are sort of in the daily communication around those data points and just updating things, just cleaning data, doing all that stuff. If you don't have that level of system support, it is going to either protract things or create some barriers or challenges. So that's something that we really are trying to figure out. And as Tomiquia said, the Urban Institute is going to be doing, we are partnering in this research study and trying to provide as much data as we can to them to do that level of an evaluation. But that's going to be an evolutionary process in my mind too. But I can't underscore that as something, if you can start in that sort of, with that level of capacity, I think that would help to prevent some of the obstacles that will surface.
That's really helpful, Mary, and I think that's also a nice segue into maybe where we can turn next, which is, before we open this up for anybody in the room or joining online to be able to ask questions that they might have after hearing all of this, just give you three an opportunity to reflect really around lessons learned that would help in replicating or expanding the approach that you've used. I've got a graphic here that's from Hamilton Families' site, really just again depicting that. This looked like a real-time count, Tomiquia, of kind of that's regularly updated of how many families toward that 800 family goal you've been able to successfully house, as well as what I assume was a thermometer and now is a full thermometer showing that you've reached your funding goal. And so kind of looking back, other than what you've already shared, which is fantastic, are there other lessons that you've learned along the way, or things that if you had to do it again, you'd do differently that could be helpful as these communities right now in Minnesota are preparing to submit applications for Homework Starts with Home? Or anything that's been really surprising or unexpected that you want to share?
I guess, I think that, we've sort of referenced this on the call, but, this partnership does seem like such an intuitive part of how you're going to solve the problem, to actually go where the students and the families are, to really figure out how to connect people as quickly as possible to resources, even in a resource constrained environment like the Bay Area, specifically around housing. But I think that, again, one of the sort of lessons for me is being able to integrate approaches like this in how each of the systems are thinking about the issue. So what I mean is, if the school district is doing a body of work around how to support homeless students more effectively, really understanding then how what we started working with them on around the pilot and heading home enhances what they're doing, so that this doesn't become sort of ornamental, but it actually becomes a part of the strategy that the school district is utilizing in terms of how they're thinking about supporting students during the school day, and then us complementing that work from a community perspective. And I think the same goes for the city, really trying to understand, the city has been focused on standing up family coordinated entry, which we 100% support. And how do we recognize, how do we help them do that work in the context of some of the strategic goals we have? So really aligning around goals and outcomes, I think, is critical. And leading with that really, I think, supports the longevity and, success of any effort, because there's so much of, there's just bureaucracy and processes and things to work through. And so having a through line that's really focused on your outcomes is really important. And I feel like when you can do that on the front end, and I love that you all are designing your initiative around a collaborative application process, because it then requires each of the partners in the collaborative to really think through what are our collective goals, and how are we going to support each other to reach them. And then the last lesson for me is just adaptability and having nimbleness in your partnerships to really be able to respond to the real-time changes in the conditions for folks that you serve. So for us, when we launched Heading Home under Jeff's leadership, when he was at Hamilton before I was here, in 2016, in December of 2016, the implementation process has looked very different, because the conditions have changed dramatically for our families in terms of affordability, in terms of overall poverty persistence. The two-generation approach is really important too. So again, I think you need to have partnerships that allow for that continuous improvement, so that you can make improvements and adjustments to your interventions that still have the outcomes that you want.
That's fantastic, Tomiquia, and I really appreciated that. I appreciate all those points you just made. I really appreciated the way that, I think what you described in your first point is really the idea that this is not I think you used the term ornamental or kind of one and done siloed initiative, but can really help to illuminate systems change between these interrelated systems all of which, families are interacting with at the same time, can actually be working in a much more coordinated way. I think that is very central to the aspirations and vision of what we're trying to achieve with Homework Starts with Home. So I think just seconding that emotion. So thank you for that. Jeff or Mary, anything that you'd like to add in terms of your big takeaways or what's been surprising or where you hope to go next?
Well, one thing that I would add is that it's important, at least for, different organizations have different missions and different, the school district's goals and the nonprofit's goals and the city's goals are different. But I think the one common theme needs to really be that we are trying to end homelessness for as many families as we possibly can. But sometimes that comes with the painful understanding that ending homelessness isn't necessarily going to end a family's poverty. And although in the vast majority of cases it's not going, families won't return to homelessness after receiving these kinds of interventions. I mean, some do. So it's really balancing and it's a challenge from a big picture perspective as human beings who care about the welfare of our brothers and sisters on the planet. We want to try to solve or help families address all of their problems, but the homelessness response system really needs to stay focused on trying to get as many people off of the streets as quickly as we possibly can, and then try to improve the construction of, if you will, of sort of bridges between the homelessness response system and other programs that can help families be successful. And I would say especially for families, there's a strong degree of urgency around doing that piece because, we don't want a family, just because they're not homeless, we don't want their children to not have opportunities. So as I think Tomiquia was implying that we don't have a second generation of extremely low income or homeless young people who end up growing up and finding themselves in the same situation. So, it's a balancing act, and it's also, each community is different. So, I wouldn't presume to know what's best in Minnesota, but I would say in San Francisco and in California, where homelessness has gone up overall 15% during the past year, there's an urgency to getting people off of the streets, and we shouldn't let trying to be perfect get in the way of addressing what I see as a humanitarian crisis.
And I just wanted to sort of piggyback on a point that Jeff just made, which is, the homelessness response system really should, the analogy that really comes to mind for me is, be a functional ER, right? Like you really need to be able to prioritize those who are most acutely in need. And I think one of the interesting dynamics that we have in San Francisco, and Jeff, I'm curious if this resonates with you, and you too, Mary, is we have multiple definitions of homelessness that we all, right? So the span of like what is most urgent and acute is interpreted, right? So, with the partnership with the school district, we focus on families who are doubled and tripled up. For, the national definition is a little bit more, broad, the HUD definition, right? So it's really interesting, I think, to come together around who serves what and who's, how do you sort of get in your lane around a continuum of support, and who is responsible for our emergency response systems, as well as then the complementary support to really supporting all populations who are experiencing homelessness toward a journey of self-sufficiency and success. And so it's not simple.
Yeah.
And
I would jump in and just say that we actually don't have multiple definitions, and there's multiple definitions at the national level, which is the U.S. Department of Education and HUD. And HUD have different definitions, yes. And Healthcare for the Homeless program has a different definition. San Francisco uses the Healthcare for the Homeless and the Department of Education definition around families that are homeless, but then within that we prioritize families who are literally unsheltered, or families who are experiencing a domestic violence crisis and they're not in a safe place. And then we have to then prioritize families that are doubled up, and then prioritize families who are in kind of unstable situations or less stable situations, which is a really painful thing to have to do. And as Tomiquia said earlier, it's we don't have enough resources. So the heartbreaking part of my job is having to figure out how to best prioritize those resources. And the ER analogy is one that gets used often, and I think it's the right one, which is we have to triage people when they come in. But I don't think, though, as a society or as a school system or as a nonprofit or city government, that's enough of a response.
Right.
We obviously need to do more and better, but while we're working on doing more and better, we also need to triage people quickly and get them help quickly. So in San Francisco, for example, we are probably less than 2 months away from ending unsheltered family homelessness in the city. But to do that, but we've had to make some really painful and sometimes unpopular decisions. And again, I wouldn't presume what any given community should do. It's just these are some of I think all we're doing is surfacing some of the challenges, and then I'm sure you all will figure out some of the solutions.
Well, that's really helpful. Thank you. And that's so exciting to know that you're that close. That's great, Jeff. Mary, anything that you'd like to add in terms of, if we had to do it over again, or things that you're looking forward to in terms of additional refinement or improvements, or things that have been surprising?
Well, I am never of the mind of having to do it over again. I think that we're where we are because of what I heard, and I heard from Jeff and to me, and I also feel like it's something that we sit with as a district, that this is a priority for us, and we see the sort of end goal, if you will, or what the impacts we want to experience, and we want our students and families to experience every day, those positive impacts. I think this, for me, as a longtime educator and administrator, is, and I know Kevin shares this as well, is that persistence in this mission, in this work, in this partnership, and commitment to continuous improvement of our work together, and coming in with that attitude every single day that this to me is a day-by-day challenge that is not there. I don't see the immediate future, or I don't even want to sort of gesture to say that a resolution is there or we're done with something. This is about, again, that commitment and persistence around continuous improvement of our partnership. And I think we have the willingness to do that. I know that we have the skill and potentially can build the capacity as we need it. And as we continue to evaluate and assess our work together and develop what those needs are, the resources are there because we have in our foundation a school district that has prioritized this work. And that's a big component of this. That level of advocacy, when the superintendent of our schools and our Board of Education say this work is prioritized, that's a major testimony. So I think anything's possible. It's just for us to be engaged in these ongoing conversations and dialoguing about how we can be better with each other in relationship to this work and to the goals that we have. Because we're going to do anything to support this goal. Because, of course, at the end of this, we want our families to have stable and permanent housing because we know of the impact, the positive impacts on their educational experience from the district seat.
Well said. Wow. Well, thank you. I'd love to now open this up and invite people that are joining here in the room or over the phone or on the webinar to be able to ask any questions they have. I'll just activate this Menti slide here to see if we've got any questions that have popped in that way. But if you're joining on the phone, just feel free to speak up.
Eric, before you do that, my apologies. I'm going to have to hop off of the call to attend a meeting with our mayor, but I appreciate the opportunity. And if folks have any specific questions they'd like to run by me, Eric has my email address, or it's jeff.kositsky@sfgov.org. Feel free to reach out anytime. And thanks for the opportunity,
Jeff,
Eric.
So much for being here and for your work.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
So, those of you joining on the phone or in the room or on the webinar, feel free to either jump in with questions on the Menti tool or just chime in. While we're waiting for those questions, let me just say, Tomiquia and Mary, and kind of along the lines of what I just said to Jeff as well, I am so inspired to hear, not only, having heard the journey from the presentation I heard Jeff give at a couple of those conferences, but really to be able to hear you all talk in a much deeper and more nuanced way about the way in which this partnership has evolved and the impact that it's having in your community is so incredibly inspiring. So I just am so grateful for your leadership and your willingness to share what you've learned and the bumps along the way, but also just the way that you've been able to connect each other's missions and focus and priorities together so powerfully. So I'm so grateful for that. I'd like to give folks on the phone or in the room or on the web a chance, one more moment here. So here's a question that's popped in. Is your public housing authority involved in this work at all? Tomiquia, maybe I'll start that one with you.
Yeah, so the Housing Authority is not directly involved in the partnership with the school district and Hamilton and the Heading Home initiative. However, in the overall homelessness and supportive housing strategy for the city that Jeff is working on, the Housing Authority is absolutely involved. They are providing vouchers through an initiative called the Move On Initiative, which allows for people who have been living in permanent supportive housing for a very long time and now want to sort of step down their need for service and move into a more independent living situation. The Housing Authority is partnering with the city to provide portable vouchers for those individuals to move out of the supportive housing units, and then that makes way for more individuals who need permanent supportive housing to move in. So they're partnering on that initiative, and then they're also under the initiative called Hope SF, which I actually used to run with Mayor Lee's office. It's a revitalization of all of the public housing in San Francisco. So all, I think there's 6,000 units are being rebuilt. About a third of those have been redeveloped already. And so residents are staying in their communities while the redevelopment is happening. And there's both a sort of housing development strategy to get all of those units built over the next 15 years, but also how are we supporting the residents and being able to have economic and social opportunities in their communities to thrive and move beyond poverty. And so the Housing Authority is a really active partner with the city in the overall strategy in supporting low-income and formerly homeless individuals.
Fabulous, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Give folks just a chance. Here's another question that's popped in. Can you give more details and ideas around raising funds for this program outside of state funding? So if I heard Jeff right, Tomiquia, it sounded like the city contributed $7 million and Hamilton was able to raise $23 million. Did I get that number right? And if so, how did you manage to raise $23 million?
Well, we had an opportunity to partner with some individuals here in San Francisco that saw mutual benefits. So Mark Benioff, who's the president and CEO of Salesforce, and his wife Lynn Benioff were really interested in this work and believing they've invested in the San Francisco Unified School District for the last decade. And Mary, you can maybe talk a little bit more about Salesforce's partnership, but they have been interested in supporting families in San Francisco for quite a long time and recognized that family homelessness was something that is solvable and that they wanted to get involved. So once they were able to contribute some match funding that was secured, and then I was able to really figure out how to leverage other donors to really be a part of the movement. I think what was transformative for us in getting the private sector involved was that we really believe that family homelessness is solvable. I think in many of our communities, homelessness sort of gets wrapped up into this intractable social problem, and people sort of throw up their hands or feel like, people or cities or individuals or nonprofits aren't doing enough. And I think it was really inspiring for the private sector and philanthropy to get involved and feel like we were on the journey together. And so we were able to leverage those resources.
Fabulous. That's great.
But I
Mary,
guess I would just say.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Sorry, Eric. I just wanted to say, every community is different, right? And so in communities where you might not have big business partners or private philanthropy in your communities, I do think that there's still an opportunity to engage, diverse community partners in trying to leverage resources. So if it's, whatever business sector there is, what's their relationship to how they support the community? Whatever, public institutions that there might be, like the district, like, other academic institutions, just really being creative about helping everyone see themselves in the solution is a way to sort of generate support when you don't have large-scale companies like we do in the Bay Area, but you can still get that public-private partnership as a part of your strategy.
That's great. That's great. Mary, anything you want to add on the fundraising front?
As Tomiquia mentioned too, our relationship with one of the primary funders of the Heading Home campaign, as I understand it, Salesforce, actually has been engaged with the district in multiple initiatives, usually more of redesign around different levels of schooling or potentially even curriculum or programming. But what I recall 2 years ago or 3 years ago when there was a press event and Mark Benioff stood up in front of the audience at that point, which involved other partners that we have in the school district, other sort of robust sponsors that we've had in the past, and they're local advocates of public education as well. That Mark had mentioned the fact that actually, and I think this speaks to something that, and when I think about this too is, when we thought about homelessness in the past, and what my experience, I've lived in San Francisco for over 30 years now, this notion about homelessness and the challenges with homelessness in San Francisco had a certain face, right? There was a face of homelessness or a description of that. And the way that Mark had described it and what we were struggling with to bring this to the forefront and the visibility, if you will, sort of that hidden in plain sight notion, was Mark mentioned right at the beginning of his presentation at this launch or press conference. He said, I was sitting with something came up. There was some news item or something where suddenly there was a depiction of families experiencing homelessness in San Francisco. And it literally, to me, what I felt, my perception of that and the way he presented it was a tipping point. It was a tipping point moment where it was like, is this even possible? Is this possible? And that's sort of the notion of hidden in plain sight. And I think that just changed the whole trajectory of this work. And that kind of fostered or created a foundation for a shift in the campaign and the work and the way that people were willing to sort of step into this work and to approach this work and to dedicate or advocate and sponsor this work. So for me, that was critical. And of course, Mark Benioff brings through Salesforce an incredible amount of financial resources, what it did for us as a school district, because we don't necessarily, it wasn't really about that for us. It was, again, shifting people's mindset and making sure that those people that we had deployed in service of this work were doing the right work. And so that's what it did for us, was now suddenly we were informing people and exposing them to what is right here in front of them every single day. And beyond that school day, they might see a homeless student or a family during the school day, and it still didn't penetrate sort of their deeper level of thinking. But when we gave them more of that data, more of the presentation of some of the partnerships and the other partners that we have in this work, and sort of made it visible, it changed the whole game for us. It changed the whole game for us. And not only that, then we decided, why are we deploying our resources as limited as they are through the state and federal funding that we get through Title I? Why are we deploying it for these baseline services that won't necessarily have the impact? We can do better in the way of now managing not only human resources, but our capital, even though it's limited, in ways that are much more strategic and are going to take us to that next level of the work. So that, to me, again, it was a nuance of that kind of qualitative or narrative or the story behind why we should be doing this, why we must be doing this, to then now just bringing us all together with that level of agency, but also coherency around this work.
That's great, Mary. That is really, really helpful. Thank you. Well, I want to give one last call for questions. If folks have any other questions they'd like to pose. Well, Tomiquia and Mary, let me say again, just I consider you both such heroes and such great, incredible leaders in this work. I'm so grateful for you to be so generous with your knowledge and your time today. In closing, let me just also say that if you want any more information, if you're joining this webinar and want any more information about Homework Starts with Home, here are a couple of web addresses you can go to: the Minnesota Department of Education's Homework Starts with Home page, and the second link there is Minnesota Housing's page, which includes the RFP materials. Applications, again, as a reminder, are due on Monday by 4:30. Those details are included in the RFP for how you need to submit your materials. If you have any questions, the person to contact is Diane Elias, and she can be reached at 651-284-3176. So once again, Tomiquia and Mary, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you all for joining today's discussion, and good luck with your applications. Thanks very much.